The anime begins with an old man looking for his niece named Integra, who is the heir to the army of the Royal Church Hellsing Agency. And while she hides, her uncle confesses that he waited 20 years for his father to die. However, before he died he left a will that she disagrees with, in which he handed over leadership of the family to her. And because something like that can't be approved, he prepares his weapon to take over the Hellsing Agency for himself. For her part, Integra remembers her father's words on his deathbed. He recommended that when an overwhelming power corners her, she heads to the abandoned underground prison, since there lies Hellsing's greatest achievement, which will be able to save her. Finally, Integra arrives at the place indicated by her father, and there she finds something terrifying. But when she was wondering if that would save her, her uncle appears from behind pointing a gun, and after shooting her once, he approaches her to finish her off with a shot in the forehead. Only before doing so, Hellsing's greatest achievement by being splattered with Integra's blood awakens. So after drinking blood, he gains enough strength to free himself from the clothes that imprisoned him, causing fear in everyone. The scene changes and we see the police arrive at an abandoned church where they encounter a vampire. Seeing them enter, the vampire sends his subjects to attack them, and after a small combat the police are defeated. Later, we see how a group of police officers in a camp receive a visit from leader Hellsing. The policeman asks Sir Integra Fairbrook Wingate's Hellsing what she needs. She tells them that the town they are investigating has become a den of ghouls, and then he explains to them that they are the result of a non-virgin human being attacked by vampires. So, taking that into account, he warns them that there is a vampire in the town. The police officer, upon hearing her, laughs at what she is saying because he does not believe in occult stories. But she tells him that because of her position, maybe she doesn't know about it, nor does she need to know. However, as the leader of the Hellsing Agency for years, he has faced these vampire zombie monsters, which is normal since they are a secret military agency founded to eliminate the anti-Christian monsters that threaten England. In the next scene, we see how the police shoot the ghouls while Integra warns the rest that they are facing a monster. And for that reason, he warns them that no matter how many soldiers or officers I send against him, they will only feed him. She tells him that the Draculas are virgins, and that is why the Draculinas will only create more vampires if they suck blood from a virgin. So the rest of the humans who attack become servants of the vampires like the ghouls. And suddenly they are interrupted by a police officer who reports that they lost contact with both the second and third squads. His words disturb the rest of the police, and Integra tells them that to prevent the ghouls they must kill the vampire. And even though the police officer refuses, the leader informs him that she sent an anti-vampire expert to the town of Cheddar. Hearing her words, the policeman asks what kind of man he sent, and she answers that a monster. And then we can see the protagonist named Alucard walking under the light of the moon. On the other hand, the police who previously confronted the vampire are trying to flee, only that even though she ran quickly, he found her. The vampire jumps on her and shows her that her companions now belong to him, so he offers her to do the same. But she refuses, shooting in the face of the vampire, who complains that he only wants loyal slaves. So he decides that he will first take her body by force and then drink her blood. And before doing so, he is interrupted by Alucard, who introduces himself to him as a murderer. Upon hearing this, the vampire orders his slaves to kill him, and when they try, they discover that their shots do not affect the murderer. Alucard begins to laugh darkly, and after showing his power, he shoots the vampire's ghouls, who is amazed watching how the shots from their weapons kill the ghouls. That's why Alucard tells him that his bullets are steel explosives created from the silver cross at Lanchester Cathedral. And the other vampire, very astonished, asks him why one of them is allied with humans. And later he decides to threaten to end the life of the police if he moves. But then he asks him to ignore him in exchange for not killing the last survivor so he can escape. Hearing this, Alucard asks the police if she is still a virgin, to which she, very embarrassed, responds that she still is. But before he finishes speaking, he fires a shot, passing through the police and ending the life of the enemy vampire. The scene changes and we can see the moment when Integra met Alucard. And back with Alucard, while the police are dying, he tells them that he shot through his lung to reach the vampire's heart, so he doesn't think it will last long, and then asks him what he is going to do. She, crying, remembers her parents and extends her hand to Alucard, who continues to think that today is a good night. And later we see that the young woman is taken to a place full of ghouls who are happy to see a woman. But while they chase her, the policewoman bumps into Alucard, who asks her how it feels to be dead. And to her surprise, Alucard tells her that he chose the path to become a Draculina, so he proceeds to bite her. Later, the policewoman wakes up scared without knowing where she is. But after checking her wounds, she sees that Alucard is next to her, and then he asks her what it feels like to be a Draculina. When the policewoman sees his fangs, she is terrified, which makes her scream loudly, which gets Integra to scold her for being noisy. Upon hearing it, the woman gets frustrated because she is a Draculina, and then asks them where they are. Integra informs him that they are in the Royal Church's army known as the Hellsing Agency, and later he tells him that from now on he will work as part of the agency, which is why he gives him his uniform. The scene changes and we move to another crime scene where a person was murdered by removing his head. And after doing so they left a message which challenges Christianity, which upsets Integra, since the vampire is underestimating the Protestants, the English, and the Hellsing. So we later observe that they are going in search of the objective who is moving north along Route 12. Integra then demands that the policewoman not let those abominations escape. On the other hand, a couple of vampires, after killing a person, rejoice thinking that they are the strongest. But suddenly they are interrupted by Alucard, who easily killed one of them even though he was shot many times. And after doing so, he tells the policewoman not to let the other vampire escape. She who was waiting from the top of the house, very terrified because she did not believe she was capable of murdering the fleeing vampire. But Alucard tells him the correct way to use his powers, and in this way he manages to pierce the vampire's heart with a shot. The policewoman was amazed by what he did and realizes that she can also speak telepathically with Alucard. In the next scene we find Integra complaining that there are too many vampires causing crimes, and also how they are crimes caused by the weakest doing senseless and stupid actions. She begins to believe that someone is intentionally producing vampires. And then a new day begins where we can see a representative of the Vatican talking to another man. The Vatican representative is happy that many vampires appeared in England to kill Protestants, but the old man tells him that the Hellsing were acting too well, which caused there to be few casualties. So the Vatican representative confesses to them that they are low-level amateurs compared to Catholics, and he also tells him that if the problems are only in England they should not act. But the old man responds that it is not only happening in England since Ireland is also being affected. And because the Hellsing didn't sit idly by, it's time for them to act too. He finally asks Anderson not to let the Hellsing take the initiative to hunt down the vampires before them. Anderson asks him what would happen if they cross paths with the Hellsing, and he replies that they are the only legitimate agents of God, so they cannot allow themselves to be provoked by heretics. The scene changes again and we see how Alucard takes care of a horde of ghouls. For her part, the police girl also tries to do her job, realizing that they are no longer human. And thanks to this she begins to develop her ability as Draculina, while Alucard tells her that they can no longer save the ghouls. For that reason, the power-blind police girl begins cleaning up ghouls throughout the place, enjoying killing them. Alucard, upon seeing her, is happy that she finally understands what they are, and then we see her trying to drink their blood. However, she is suddenly pierced by many bayonets of polite blessing, which astonishes Alucard, who subsequently sees how a barrier is placed around him, and then Anderson appears before him. Anderson tells him that he is a vicar of Christ, an agent sent to Earth to carry out God's punishment. The scene changes and we watch as Integra is informed about the mobilization of Section 13 Iscariot of the Vatican Secret Service. When she hears it, she becomes concerned due to their reputation as professionals in the extermination of heretics. But later he asks him about the number of men who were mobilized, and his subject answers that there is only one, and it is about the Paladin Father Alexander Anderson, which upon hearing it worries Integra about what would happen if she meets Alucard. Thinking about the possibilities, Integra immediately decides to travel to the town of Baedric to meet Alucard. But before leaving, he assigns Walter the responsibility of negotiating with the Vatican, which he accepts with great honor. And as he begins his journey, Integra knows that there is no way that if the Paladin finds his subjects he will not attack them. On the other hand, we see Paladin Anderson rejoice when he hears the police girl's moans of pain. But she is still aware that her wounds will not kill her since no bayonet pierced her heart. He tells them that this is his first vampire hunt in a long time, and that's why he plans to enjoy it. Alucard, for his part, shows him that he knows who he is and which division he belongs to. So Anderson approaches him, confessing to being surprised how a vampire allies herself with humans to hunt vampires. Alucard, seeing him coming, asks him what he did with the vampire that was in the place, to which he replies that he already took care of that. And when they finally face each other, Anderson tells Alucard that now it is his turn to start the fight. During the first attack, Alucard is wounded, although he suddenly uses his pistol to shoot Anderson's face, and that causes Alucard to tell him that he is a very bold father to try to attack a vampire at night without using the factor of surprise. Seeing her dead hunter, the police girl begs her teacher for help, to which Alucard asks her not to move. But when trying to help her with her injuries, she receives an attack from Anderson, who had not died as they believed, and after receiving the attack, Alucard moves away from Father Anderson to shoot him repeatedly. However, he is surprised to see that he cannot harm him, and on the contrary he attacks him harder and harder. And in this way Anderson manages to corner Alucard, who discovers that he is facing a regenerator. His opponent, upon hearing it, confirms this and tells him that it is a technology created by humans to confront monsters. And later he pierces it with his bayonets, causing great damage to Alucard, whose head is cut off. After ripping off Alucard's head, Anderson begins to rejoice at his victory. On the other hand, Integra asks her pilot to hurry up because she is worried about her subject's combat. And then we see that Anderson wonders if this little thing was Hellsing's trump card. But when he was complaining that the Protestants lied to him, he notices that Draculina fled. Meanwhile, the police girl with her last strength tries to remove the bayonets from her body, since she is carrying the head of Alucard in her hands, to whom she confesses that it is not fair for him to abandon her at this moment. But suddenly Anderson throws a bayonet at his head, causing him to fall from his hands. He, ready with his weapons, tells him that he has no place to flee and that is why he will end his life. The very scared girl only thinks of a way to escape to report what happened to Chief Integra. But when Anderson tries, he shows him that he placed barriers so that he cannot escape. She begins to lose her mind due to the panic she feels until suddenly Alucard tells her that this is not the time for that. And then after fading her head, Alucard asks her to drink his blood so that she can become a true vampire. Alucard tells him that by doing so he will be a lifeless king whom he decided to name Victoria. But before Victoria makes the decision, Anderson appears from behind, ready to end her life. However, before doing so, Integra arrives at the scene, questioning that what she is doing is breaking the treaty they have. Integra explains to him that the area they are in is within her jurisdiction, which is why she demands that he leave immediately, because otherwise it will cause a conflict between the Vatican and the Hellsing. Anderson laughs as he does not plan to retire because they are the agents sent to Earth to carry out God's punishment. And while calling her a disgusting bitch, Anderson launches the attack, causing Integra's guards to have to protect her. But he easily ends their lives, so Integra must fight him on her own. Integra, upon discovering his ability to regenerate, calls him a monster, and he tells her that if she is scared, it is because they are too weak, so they will be left out of this matter. Anderson then tells her that she decapitated the annihilator she is so proud of, but she laughs in his face because she knows that won't be enough to finish off Alucard. And suddenly Victoria interrupts them, yelling at Anderson to get away from her boss. When he hears her, he just ignores her and then confesses to Integra that he will finish them all right now. So Integra responds that if he plans to do that he should hurry because otherwise Alucard will come back to life. And suddenly a colony of bats invade the place, and Integra tells Anderson that Alucard is an unusual vampire. She tells him that just as he is the fruit of anti-monster technology, his subject is the most powerful undead, since the Hellsing family dedicated 100 years of excessive efforts to its creation. And later we see how Alucard returned to life to continue his fight against Anderson. During the fight, Alucard brags about his ability to regenerate, which worries his rival. Integra, for her part, asks Anderson what decision he will make at this moment. And knowing that with his current level he will not be able to win, he decides to leave the place. Finally, after his departure, Integra worries about Alucard and then tells him that now the Vatican owes them too much for breaking the agreement. But even so, it is not yet time to confront them because they must take care of the hidden organization behind the vampire cases. Hearing her, Alucard begs her to order him to kill them all, to which she responds that when the time is right she will do it. And later Alucard approaches Victoria to ask her why she didn't drink his blood. Victoria, a little embarrassed, tells him that she felt that if he took something from her it would end, which upon hearing her annoys Alucard, who calls her stupid. And then Integra asks Alucard why he turned the policewoman into a vampire. He responds that influenced by humans, he believes it was just on a whim. In the next scene we see how a young Count Alucard is defeated by Abraham van Helsing. Abraham tells the Count that nothing remains of his castle or his feudal state, so even the place of his Eucharistic host has disappeared, and furthermore he will never get it. And subsequently he hits him, causing great damage to the Count, who finally weakens. But then we see the Count wake up, who realizes that it was all a dream, and that's why he gets upset. And then we headed to the round table meeting called by Chief Integra. There the members of the board inform him that crimes by vampires have increased in recent months, so they begin to complain that they cannot stop them and that there is a limit to manipulating information. Integra responds that after investigating those she defeated, she found something similar to a transmitter, and then he confesses that perhaps he was inserted into the vampires to analyze and report their condition in many aspects. For that reason, he believes that everything that happens is not natural and logically someone manipulates the vampires. And to the surprise of all the members, he tells them that the ghoul's transformation has also changed. She reveals to them that it is strange that with all these events not a single vampire has been spawned, since even girls who are clearly virgins have all turned into ghouls. But that's not all, because normally ghouls die when the creator vampire dies. However, in the Baedric case, even though Anderson defeated the vampire, the place was still full of ghouls. And after saying that, he explains to them that his belief is that whoever manipulates them is familiar with both vampires and ghouls. On the other hand, we see that Victoria is worried when she sees that Walter placed a coffin in her room. Walter tells him that he did it because it was an order given by Integra because vampires sleep in coffins. But Victoria questions him what he did to his bed, to which he replies that he already got rid of it. And this causes the young woman to get very upset with Walter, who reveals to her that it was also Alucard's order, since she hasn't drunk a drop of blood since she became a vampire. So if he doesn't sleep in a coffin made from his homeland, his powers will continue to weaken. And after hearing that, Victoria still has doubts about whether to accept the coffin or not. But suddenly Alucard arrives at the scene. He explains to him what it means to have chosen darkness, and then Walter hands Alucard a briefcase. When he opens it, Alucard finds a new weapon which is made especially for him because not even humans can use it. And upon hearing Walter's specifications, he confesses that it is a perfect weapon. So Alucard tells him that perhaps with this weapon he will be able to defeat even Anderson. And Walter, seeing Sira's admiration for the weapon, tells her that he also prepared one for her. But Sira's, looking at the size of his weapon, is surprised and asks him what the hell that is. The scene changes and we see how two men prepare to carry out a job in a restricted area. But at the entrance they are stopped by the guards, who ask their identity. And no matter how much they tried to deceive them, the guards demanded that they leave. So one of them uses his power to give an order and thus quickly end his life with a shot. And later his companion gives another signal indicating that the remaining guard was riddled with many shots. Finally, after ordering the shooting to stop, he tells his subjects to get out of their vehicle to invade the place. The scene changes and we see how Integra's meeting is interrupted by the arrival of these two individuals. And then he receives a call from his guards, who tell him that they are being attacked by the enemy. Integra orders the guard to repel them, or if they can't, try to buy time. And then he tries to find out who they are facing or how many enemies they are, and his subject answers that they are ghouls. So she, as well as the entire board of directors, were terrified when they heard that. And then we see the soldiers try to defeat the army of ghouls. However, due to their weapons they are easily defeated without causing many casualties. And even worse when one of the leading vampires also decides to participate in the fight. On the other hand, at the round table, the managers ask Integra to get time since escaping the place is her main priority. But suddenly they hear how the helicopter they were planning to flee in has been destroyed. And then from the security room they tell Integra that they are already at the limit because the enemy has reached their position. Integra tries to find out what happened, and on the other side Jan, one of the Valentine brothers, appears before her. Jan tells him that they are in the middle of a late lunch because they are giving a banquet to his men. And then he tells her that he will soon kill her, so he recommends that she pray to her god. But while playing with the head of one of the soldiers, he suggests that it would be best for him to commit suicide since he still has time. The managers, upon hearing this, ask Integra what is happening, and she tells them that apparently their information was leaked. So he proceeds to call Walter, who tells him that he is in Sira's room. And after receiving the information about what is happening, he tells her that it will take 4 or 5 hours to remain incommunicado. For that reason, military reinforcements will only arrive at that time. Walter, thinking about the situation, recommends defending the conference room with the rest of his strength during all that time. Upon hearing this, his boss accepts the recommendation and asks him for instructions on how to do it. He asks her to first secure the only path leading to the conference room, since later they will use Alucard and Sira's to divide the work of one attacking and the other defending. Hearing his plan, Integra asks him how they will get to his position if the place is full of ghouls. Walter reminds her how she got to Alucard's underground 10 years ago, and that's why he understands that they will go through the ventilation. So now Walter prepares to leave, although Integra first asks him for something. She demands that they not leave anyone alive as revenge for eating her men. Meanwhile, we see that Luke walks through the building looking at the paintings there. But when he stops to look at a painting that catches his attention, he is suddenly attacked. The soldiers who hoped they would fall into the trap head to their position believing they have succeeded. However, Luke managed to escape in time and then easily finished them off by destroying their bodies. And later he receives a call from his brother who informs him that he has finished cleaning both the first and second floors, so they only have to make their way to the conference room and kill everyone there. Luke gives him permission to continue with the plan since he is about to head underground in search of Alucard. And next we hear Integra inform everyone that the enemy will be arriving soon. But he also tells them that there is no place to escape because they are surrounded. Sir Penwood, hearing her, asks her how she will respond to what has just happened. But another of the managers orders him to remain silent and tells him that now they must defend themselves when the time comes. Upon hearing this, Penwood begins to complain that everyone is going to die because they have to face armed ghouls. However, suddenly Siras and Walter arrive at the place, which calms Integra down. But he still asks Walter if after analyzing the situation he thinks they are finished. He tells her no because compared to what the First Lord Hellsing faced, this is nothing. And then he tells him that Alucard from the underground plus those who are going to intercept them from the roof will make an exit. Walter then reminds him that his request was not to leave anyone alive, and that is what he plans to do. On the other hand, Jan complains about the gap between the rich and the poor, which is why he promises that as revenge he will slowly kill Integra. Luke, for his part, heads to the underground where he went in search of Alucard, whom he asks to stop hiding. But Alucard tells him that he is not hiding since he was just resting because it took him a long time to arrive. Luke introduces himself to Alucard and shows him respect because it is the first time they have met. On the other hand, Jan walks down the hallway towards the conference room and promises to abuse Integra before killing her. But first he meets Walter, who with a minimal movement killed many ghouls from his army. And later he confesses to regretting that he is not as good as before because otherwise he would have died. Jan, seeing him approaching, orders his people to shoot him, only for Walter to dodge all the shots and also kill the ghouls. So Jan can't believe what he's seeing and worries as he sees his enemy getting closer and closer. But suddenly he starts laughing in her face and confesses that he's excited that this isn't too easy. And then he orders his army to improve their positions to attack the Mayordomo. But Walter tells Siras to start with her direct support by attacking the ghouls. She follows his instructions and thus manages to kill a large number of ghouls. And this impatience Jan, who attacks Walter only to be almost killed by the skill he uses. But seeing that Jan didn't do it, he decides to attack again, and this time Siras stops him. Walter approaches Jan and begins to interrogate him about everything they were planning. And because he acts oblivious, Walter tortures him to get him to talk. Jan tells him that they wanted to attack the agency, the Round Table Conference, and eliminate Alucard. But upon saying that they were asked for that, Walter discovers that he is not alone and he confesses that his brother must be emptying his weapon into Alucard. However, Luke continues talking to Alucard because he admires him so much and knows everything about him. Luke confesses that before when he was human he feared him, and when he stopped being human he wanted to be like him. So he followed his shadow even if he got lost in the darkness, to which Alucard asks him to stop talking nonsense. And that's why Luke confesses that his dream is to end his legend of immortality, which caused them both to shoot each other. But after being shot they both start laughing because they can't die and then continue fighting. During the fight Luke promises that he will overcome it since that is what he was created for. But when he tries, Alucard easily defends himself against him and shows him his great power along with his new weapon. Luke, surprised by the weapon, tells him that it has the same abilities and even more. In the next scene we hear how Jan tells Walter that they were created to defeat them. And then he promises that they will die even though Walter doesn't understand what he plans to do. Jan suddenly manages to free himself and prepares to begin his cannibalism show with the ghouls. Sira and Walter are surprised to see the converted soldiers, which Jan takes advantage of to enter the conference room. But as soon as he arrived he was greeted by a hail of gunshots which he did not even try to dodge. On the other hand, Luke is amazed to see that Alucard does not dodge his shots, and seeing him very hurt, she thinks she can win, only for him to start laughing because he is having so much fun. Alucard tells him that he recognizes him as a vampire beyond category A, and then he proceeds to release the imitation containment spell number 3, 2 and 1, in order to be able to perform Cromwell's activation, which will cancel his power limitation until he defeats his enemy. Alucard later confesses to Luke that he will show him how a real vampire fights. Seeing Alucard's attack, Luke begins to flee in terror only for Alucard to shoot him in the legs. And upon finding himself in this situation, he asks him what it is, to which Alucard responds to transform his body, since the night has just begun and requires him to hurry to regenerate his legs. But a terrified Luke calls him a monster, which angers Alucard, who now considers him just a useless bastard. And then he feeds it to his dog because in the end it was just garbage, so now he sets out to help his companions. Meanwhile, we see that Ceres is being chased by the ghouls, who surprise Integra since they are her men. But suddenly the ghouls catch Ceres, who becomes enraged and destroys them with her vampire powers. So her boss has to stop her because she was starting to go crazy. Walter, for his part, finishes off Jan, whom he promises that he will get all his information before killing him. But suddenly Integra, very angry, shoots him and begins the interrogation. He starts laughing and tells them about the machine inserted into him which keeps sending information. Jan tells them that if he wanted to talk they would no longer keep him alive, and suddenly he begins to disintegrate. But before dying he names Millennium to them, which leaves Integra confused, who orders them to clean the place. However, Mr. Island stops her because that is the commander's task, and then gives her a gun, since she thinks that all this could have been prevented, so all the responsibility falls on her since she is the commander. Walter tries to stop her from having to act, only for Integra to stop him because she plans to accept all the blame. For his part, Islands asks Walter to investigate Millennium as discreetly as possible. The next day, we discovered that only 10 soldiers from London survived, among which 8 achieved that because they were outside the barracks. So Walter tells Integra that according to the records, only the 2 of them survived. She asks him if Ceres and Alucard are considered, to which he replies no because they are already dead. And then he informs her that he began searching for information about Millennium in the unclassified documents of the British Museum. But at the moment he did not find anything of importance, which he greatly regrets. And she tells him that he's forgetting something, that's why she talks to him about the Millennium of Empire, which was a group that fought against the world seeking the glory of a 1,000-year empire. And it was also just half a century ago, that is why Hitler's Germany was named the Third Nazi Reich. The scene changes and we hear how Walter tells Integra that he hired mercenaries to complete his ranks. Upon hearing this, she asks him if she can really trust them since they are only motivated by money. But he assures him that he can trust since these are not only mercenaries but they are also professionals. So they will remain loyal and industrious as long as they are well paid. And later we see the mercenaries in action. There they inform their captain that they are having problems maintaining their position. The captain asks them to stop complaining and take charge of the offensive. But suddenly they are almost surprised by an enemy who is stopped by the captain, who destroyed his face with a knife. Later, we observe all the mercenaries under Captain Bernadotte's order gathered at the Hellsing agency. They ask their captain what the job will be this time, and he answers that this job consists of killing monsters. But when they hear it, they start to laugh because they don't believe him, and suddenly Integra interrupts them, assuring that he is telling the truth. Integra tells them that their enemies will be vampires and ghouls who do not age because they are true immortals. And then he tells them how they finish them off by using holy water to turn their impure souls into ashes. The mercenaries, upon hearing her, ask her if she is joking since vampires do not exist. But the Hellsing leader replies that it is because they never let them know the truth. And then he tells them that a century ago a secret group called the Hellsing Agency was founded, which is in charge of these matters. So seeing that they still don't believe him, he decides to show them a vampire, so he shows them Ceres. Bernadotte, seeing her, approaches trying to flirt and asks her if she is a vampire. And when she answers yes, everyone starts laughing, so Integra orders her to give them a demonstration. Ceres accepts his order and waits for Bernadotte to approach her, as when she does so she decides to hit him in the face with a finger. The captain, after being beaten, tells his companions that Ceres is a monster. But suddenly Alucard arrives at the scene and tells her that she is part of the lowest level type of vampire. When the mercenaries see him come out of the wall, they get scared, and that's why Alucard mocks them for being so cowardly. He confesses to them that he came to see what types of soldiers they had brought to protect his master. For his part, Walter apologizes to Integra for not being able to stop him and then gives her a letter. Integra sees that she was sent by Enrico Maxwell, who is part of Section 13 of the Vatican in addition to being its leader, and is surprised. The scene changes and we see Integra impatient because her guest is late. And that's why he begins to believe that he fell into a trap, and Walter tells him that he doesn't think that's the case because they would attack us in broad daylight. But suddenly Enrico arrives at the place, amicably apologizing for having arrived late. However, Integra asks him not to come closer and then demands explanations about what the Vatican wants from the Hellsing. Upon seeing her, Enrico decides to first introduce himself as the leader of Iscariot, to which she responds that it was not necessary. And again he insists that he tell him what he wants, so Enrico asks him to calm down since he did not come to fight. But she doesn't believe him after he violated their agreement by sending Agent Anderson to Baedric to attack. And because Integra only complains, Enrico gets angry because she thinks she can trample them when there is a little peace. He confesses that he doesn't care if he kills 2 Protestants or 2 million since he would never deal with heretics like them. But he regrets having to do it since they are direct orders from the Vatican, which is why he demands that he remain silent and just listen. And because Enrico insulted Integra, Alucard was present at the scene, mocking the crying of the Iscariots. So Enrico shows him that he knows who he is and confesses that it is the first time he has seen him in person. Alucard responds that it is also a pleasure to meet him and then fires him since he has just insulted his boss. But Enrico, instead of being terrified, only mocks Alucard for his frightening appearance. And then he reminds him that he has only come to talk about something very important. But if he wants to fight so much, he assures him that they can do it and then calls Anderson. Anderson arrives at the scene reciting a passage of his beliefs and advances at a firm pace to confront Alucard. So Enrico tries to stop him, although he fails, so Alucard decides to confront him. And then they both threaten each other by directing their weapons at each other. But Enrico demands his subject stop until suddenly Ceres interrupts them for guiding a group of tourists. Finally, both fighters decide that it is not the time to fight and return to their respective activities. And then the leaders choose to go to another place to talk more calmly. Enrico reveals to Integra that he knows about the attack on his headquarters and that they are also trying to decipher a mysterious message. So he confesses that he has a group of documents whose existence is a well-kept secret. But that's not the interesting thing since the important thing is that they are all marked Millennium. And because he knows Integra's interest in the documents, he decides to show them to her. He tells her that everything happened more than 50 years ago during World War II after the defeat of Nazi Germany. Since, seeing themselves finished, several officers fled the country, forming new German organizations. Their main objective was to help Nazi war criminals who mostly fled to South America. Integra is fascinated to discover what Millennium means, and Enrico tells her that this was a great project, because it was created as a special operation of the Nazis which were financed mainly by the Vatican. On the other hand, we see that the professor and his leader Herr Commandant are spying on them, enjoying the fact that they begin to discover everything. The Herr Commandant reveals to his subject that the next time they see them there will surely be much blood and death. At night, Walter talks to Alucard about what Integra discovered. Walter confesses that he is surprised that they are dealing with Nazis, and Alucard tells him that he had sensed it for a long time. Alucard tells him that there are only 3 reasons why the undead have been used in a combat like this. The first is the Hellsing, the second is the Nazis, and finally he believes it is because of him. Alucard also reminds him that they destroyed the undead experimental unit they had 50 years ago. So Walter tells him that he does remember and then begs him not to take this matter lightly, since they openly picked a fight with them, and that is why he reminds him that they are not gentle enough to allow such things. But suddenly Integra interrupts them to ask Alucard if Walter told her about his mission. And when he answers no, his boss tells him that he should only search and then destroy everything. In the next scene we see that Alucard travels by plane with Captain Bernadotte while Ceres travels inside his coffin. Finally, everyone arrives in Rio de Janeiro where Alucard booked a hotel suite. But when he loaded up his luggage, which was Ceres's coffin, the receptionist told him that it was too big for this place. However, when the young man tried to stop him, Alucard used his power to hypnotize him, which surprised Bernadotte. And then they arrive at the suite of which, due to its size, Bernadotte complains because they sent him to a small hotel. Later, Bernadotte says goodbye to Alucard, assuring that he will come the next day to look for him during the night. Meanwhile, Enrico talks to his boss who regrets having to send him to fix the mistakes made 50 years ago. But he assures her that she need not worry as Iscariot is at her disposal to use as she wishes. So the Pope tells him that they will make their enemies fight among themselves. And later we observe how Alucard awakens Ceres from her rest in the coffin. The police girl wakes up and sees a helicopter surrounding her room, as do many police officers downstairs. She asks what's going on, as we find out the police think they're a terrorist couple. For his part, Bernadotte, watching the news, cannot believe what he is seeing. And from the other side of the world, Walter gives instructions to Alucard while Integra promises to provide the war they so long for. In the next scene, Alucard is very excited because it is time for war. On the other hand, the Rio police successfully position their snipers, which is why they will begin the attack. And later those in charge of directing the attack ask Mr. Tubalcain if everything is going as expected. He answers yes and suggests they do their best if they want a paradise without diseases or aging. Finally, the police arrive at Alucard's room, and upon entering they find Alucard waiting for them. So they start shooting until it disintegrates, believing that this will finish the job. But Alucard shows them his regeneration ability and then attacks them, destroying their bodies. Seeing this, the police try to escape, and although some manage to escape, Alucard manages to catch others. For her part, Ceres, who is hiding, comes out and finds the whole disaster caused by Alucard. He signals to her that it is time to quickly leave, and she questions him that he just killed humans. For this reason, Alucard, very upset, tells him that it does not matter if those who incite them to start a war are human or not, since they are the ones who came with the intention of killing them, and that is something that neither God nor the devil will be able to change. Alucard, having Ceres very close, sees fear in her eyes, and for that reason asks her to follow him into the darkness as much as she can. The scene changes, and we see that Integra receives a call from Alucard, who tells her that he did not leave anyone alive. But he also tells him that apparently his enemies control the police, since they sent ordinary humans to try to kill him. And then he confesses that he can still kill them without hesitation or regret for a second, since he is a monster. Alucard then asks her if she can do it too, because in reality he is only her weapon, and instead she kills them. Upon hearing this, Integra scolds him for trying to play with her and reminds him that she gave him her order, which has not changed. Alucard, upon listening to her, responds that he is happy and tells her that now he will have no chance to repent. Later, Integra asks Walter if he has made the right decision, and he answers that he is just a simple butler, so he doesn't know what the reason for his question is, and then it tells him that it's a good time to make some tea. Meanwhile, Alucard leaves his room, walking among all the police officers who only watch him in terror. However, they still shoot him, and so Alucard destroys them using his new weapons. For their part, at headquarters, upon hearing the cries for help from their companions, they are astonished. And the Hare Commandant along with his subjects enjoy watching the massacre that Alucard is causing. But he knows that as much as the death of those soldiers is fun, it's not going to get them anywhere. And that is why he asks them to warn Tubal-Cain to attack using all necessary means. On the other hand, Alucard continues to kill the police, and this causes terror in those who are still alive. They try to escape, and Alucard used his power to hypnotize one so they don't succeed. Finally, Alucard, after killing everyone who invaded his room, decides to leave through the main door. The Hare Commandant, seeing that sequence, thinks it is an excellent declaration of war. And then he confesses to being admired by Alucard's ability to stay between the limit of being sane and insane. The scene changes, and we see that Tubal-Cain approaches Alucard, saying that he was already expecting something like this. And later Alucard appears before him and questions him for having sent some painful souls for his head. Tubal-Cain, looking at the dead, responds that they are there because of their superiors who longed for the goal of eternal life. Alucard tells them that they are idiots because there is nothing eternal in this world. But his rival, ignoring what he said, asks him how many of his precious silver bullets he has left. Alucard asks him to stop talking nonsense and asks him what's next. He responds that he will take his life and then turn him into one of Millennium's samples. So in this way they begin their combat, where during it they destroy everything around them and end many lives. While they fight, they both realize that they are very powerful, and that is why Alucard decides to take the fight to another place. For his part, Captain Bernadotte kills the people at the headquarters and then destroys it with a bomb. In the next scene we see that Alucard is hurt by Tubal-Cain's letters and complains that the bleeding does not stop. But he still finds it fun, and then Tubal-Cain arrives at the scene thinking he'll be able to finish it. However, Alucard mocks that people like him still exist and confesses that he knows that everything is directed by Almayer, who is insane. So he later tells him that now he is going to scream like a pig, which Tubal-Cain doesn't think is the case. And then he attacks him again, only this time Alucard released his true power. But Ceres also arrived at the place and shoots her enemy with everything she has. Alucard later releases his creatures to distract Tubal-Cain, allowing him to get closer to him. And even though his enemy thought it possible to stop his attacks, he ended up destroyed. For that reason, Alucard asks him to let him complete his mission and give him all the information he needs. And then Alucard bites him, thus discovering before Tubal-Cain disintegrates who is behind everything. Ceres, for her part, is surprised to see how her master enjoys killing, and then Bernadotte arrives with a helicopter to flee the place. Major Hare Commandant, for his part, laughs with emotion when he sees how strong Alucard is. So he believes that thanks to Alucard he is now closer to what he has longed for half a century, since they, the Let's Battalion, will be the ones who control and create the monsters. And then Almayer indicates that it is time to return home as quickly as possible. For that reason his subjects set the destination towards Jaburo, the lair of the panther. In the next scene we see the interrogation of a member of the Vatican. He says that he once saw Elmayer and describes him saying that he had a strange appearance accompanied by an annoying smile. And he also confesses that in 1941 he cooperated with Elmayer because he skillfully managed to convince them after asking for help. Enrico, who interrogates him with a terrifying face, tries to understand what they did so that later his move will be easier to carry out. And later we hear Alucard report that he got new information. So Integra congratulates him and then tells him that His Majesty is preparing a round-table meeting. And because of the Queen's decision she needs me to return immediately with a report prepared. Alucard, for his part, accepts the task and then asks her if the pleasure of war excited her, which upon hearing it makes the leader angry. But Alucard really enjoys that reaction and begins to laugh at what happened. And later we watch the lieutenant question what Elmayer is planning. However, he responds that I couldn't answer that because he has direct orders from his superiors. But this makes the lieutenant angry and he hits him for acting like a general, and for not turning them into vampires. And suddenly he is stopped by his own soldiers who turned against him. In the present the priest confesses that Elmayer acts as a commander of hell. And then we see Elmayer tell the lieutenant that his plan is to taste the ecstasy of war for all eternity. So now elsewhere we observe that the priest begins to cry because of what he told him. But Enrico understands that Elmayer's true plan is the mass production of vampires, and that's why he thinks he knows why the Vatican got involved in that. Enrico then tells him that he lied to him before saying that Elmayer convinced them, since the truth is that they wanted to be turned into vampires just like the Nazis. The priest breaks down and confesses that it was not just him because they had been deceived, so he begs for mercy. On the other hand, we see how Alucard and his companions plan the methodology for transporting the coffins. But suddenly Anderson bursts into the place trying to hit Alucard, which causes them both to hit each other. During their fight, Alucard's companions want to stop Father Anderson. However, he terrifies them with just one look and then shows them that he brought a message from Maxwell, since their boss prepared a plane for them from the Vatican so they can travel. Meanwhile, he executes the priest who wanted to be a vampire. The scene changes and we see Alucard arrive with his companions at the round table meeting where Integra was waiting for them. She receives him kindly and then asks him to take off his glasses because he is in the presence of the Queen. Alucard agrees and after hitting 2 guards he appears before her who asks him to let him see her face. Touching her face, the Queen laments that she has aged unlike him who remains the same. But Alucard tells her that she is still the same warrior she was 50 years ago when she was a princess. And then she interrupts their reunion to ask him to give his report. Alucard begins to tell them that 55 years ago a major and his people tried to create an army of vampires. But he and Walter destroyed that project, although that was not enough for them to stop trying to achieve their goal. So now they are very close to getting it and he also tells them that they are all that remains of the Third Reich. Alucard then reveals to them that they call themselves the Order of the Millennium, which leaves everyone surprised. But suddenly a young man interrupts asking if Tubal-Cain's blood told him that, which causes everyone to focus their weapons on him. He asks them to stop because he is just a messenger who came because the important people are here. So he reveals to them that he brings a message from the Elder which he wants them to listen to. But at the moment of showing it, Officer Schrödinger discovers that from the other side they have problems with the connection. And after solving them, all the participants in the meeting see the chaos that Elmayer has in his position. Alucard, for his part, greets Elmayer who confesses that it is a pleasure to see him again. And later Integra interrupts them to try to find out what Elmayer is planning. So he introduces himself and then tells her that her question is stupid because he has no goal to achieve, since their organization is based on not achieving an objective and then showing him how they are going to kill the lieutenant. Enrico, upon seeing this, calls him a crazy bastard and the mayor responds that the Iscariot of the Vatican are not an example to talk about madness, since it is his God who guarantees this madness and that is why he asks him who guarantees the sanity of his God. Elmayer then reminds them of the number of people they killed and then challenges them to stop him. But he also tells them that neither they nor their people are his enemies, which is why he recommends that they continue to sit and wait. Because in reality his enemy is England and especially Hellsing where Alucard belongs. Alucard laughs at what he said and promises that he will destroy him as many times as he wants. Integra, for her part, orders Schrödinger to be shot and because of that Alucard blows off his head. For that reason, Elmayer treats them as violent and then says goodbye, wishing to see them again on the battlefield. And after his departure the Queen orders both Integra and Alucard to defeat their enemy. In the next scene, Elmayer along with his guards arrives before his men, and their Schrödinger waits for them anxiously. Elmayer, upon seeing the officer, congratulates him for having completed his mission correctly. Later, we watch as a fleet of Nazi ships begin their journey towards the skies over London, and the Elder for his part gives the order to send the glorious signal that will announce his triumphant return to the world. On the other hand, we see how the Nazis invade an enemy naval fleet for the safe landing of the huntress Rip Van Winkle. Upon arrival, he congratulates the commander who betrayed his people in exchange for becoming a captain and a vampire. But then his attitude changes, and because they did their job, he attacks them, ending their lives easily. In the next scene, Rip Van Winkle makes repairs on the ship until his fellow Nazis wake up, and after finishing he informs them that the German Atlantic Fleet of the Third Reich called Adler is fully operational. The scene changes and we can see that Walter and Alucard are talking about the number of people the Nazis murdered. Alucard tells him that they speak with their weapons, and that is why, thinking about it, they are not so different from them. But Walter, who disagrees, changes the subject to ask why he converted Siras. He answers that she was the one who chose to be a vampire on her own, and then asks her what they did with her family. Walter reveals that she was an orphan, which makes sense to Alucard since after losing everyone close to him he decided not to give up. And later they both regret that they cannot make her drink blood, to which Alucard assures her that she will soon do so. For her part, Siras, under the moonlight, tries to eat something alone but she can't, and for that reason Integra offers her blood because she is no longer a human. But she refuses, and for that reason Integra hurts her finger to encourage her to drink her blood. Siras feels her desire awaken and agrees to follow the orders of her leader, who asks her to now go prepare her weapons. Integra also tells him that contact was lost with an aircraft carrier near Wales, probably because of their enemies. Elsewhere, Anderson, after defeating several vampires, informs Enrico about his situation, and then he tells her that apparently everything is falling into place just as they planned. But he also confesses to being upset because he did not respond to Elmayer's provocations. Enrico tells him that it is because he only sees them as something insignificant that they will wait for the perfect moment to attack. And then he tells him that those were the orders of the Pope, who also asked them to mobilize. So he mobilized different groups which found new ways to kill vampires, and that is why they are arming themselves. Upon hearing this, Anderson is happy because it will be something similar to a crusade, to which Enrico tells him that the new enemy is the god Mars, and that is why they will fill the streets with corpses as they have done before with Allah. But because he is her secret weapon, she asks him to immediately return to her side. And after finishing the communication, Anderson heads to finish off the soldiers serving Mars who were stalking him. The scene changes. We see Rip Van Winkle eager to reach his destination. On the other hand, Integra is informed about the images they found of the aircraft carrier with which contact was lost. When she sees them, she knows that it is Millennium, and that is why she checks the condition of the place. And one of those present informs him that there are no responses from the crew members and that no more images were obtained. However, in one of the ones they already have, they found a person covering themselves on the deck with an umbrella. So they decided to send 2 teams of small SAS helicopters. Hearing this, Integra tells him that those men were only sent to be completely destroyed. And suddenly an analyst tells them that one of the helicopters sent was shot down by the person on the deck. So Integra tells the general that from now on they will take care of it their own way, since he plans to take the attack as if it were a group of armed vampires. Upon hearing it, everyone is surprised and Mr. Penwood authorizes it, giving him complete authority. Later, Walter informs his leader that they cannot cross the sea openly because they would be attacked as soon as they see them. Integra responds that no matter what happens, they have nowhere to run, and for that reason they will be trapped on the ship. But he also confesses that the ocean is like hell for vampires since they can't get out of there. So he wonders how they should send Alucard and a team to that floating fortress. They begin to debate how to do it, and after discarding several ideas, Alucard approaches them. Alucard complains about everything they have to overcome to get closer, and Integra thinks it will be impossible. But Walter suggests a plan with which they will be able to avoid all the obstacles. In the next scene we see how some fighters try to attack the aircraft carrier with missiles and are destroyed by Rip Van Winkle, who begins to sing very happily until he senses that something is approaching at high speed. The soldiers inside the ship, after seeing the radar readings, believe that something impossible is happening. And suddenly Rip Van Winkle interrupts them in despair because someone approaching carries the fragrance of death in his hands. For his part, Alucard prepares his ship to crash against the ship, and that is why the soldiers tried a defensive maneuver. Rip Van Winkle, on the other hand, aims his gun at Alucard and in doing so manages to destroy the ship. However, this causes Alucard to unleash his power against her. And then we see how Alucard destroys a large part of the ship, instilling terror among its crew. When Rip Van Winkle sees this, she is terrified because Alucard is standing in front of her. And while she remembers Elmair's words, she is frightened when Alucard begins his advance. But when he was about to reach her position, her soldiers saved her by repeatedly shooting the vampire. However, Alucard released his creatures, which caused terror in all who try to stop him with everything they have. But that was not enough because Alucard also ended their lives. Rip Van Winkle, who was trying to hide, cries from fear and suddenly sees Alucard eager to kill her. So she fills herself with courage and then wants to punish him with her cannon. When shooting, he manages to hit Alucard repeatedly, believing that this would end him. But Alucard stops his shot with his teeth and this destroys all his hopes. And later Alucard hits her several times to humiliate her, even using his own weapon. Finally, Alucard finishes her off using his creatures while drinking all her blood until she dies. For his part, the mayor congratulates her for successfully completing her mission and promises that as revenge for her death they will kill Alucard. And then we see how all the soldiers say goodbye to her with honor while they watch her die at the hands of Alucard, who, after finishing his mission, unleashes his madness, laughing like a madman enjoying the war. But the elder who sees it from his base promises that his happiness will not last forever, and that is why he must enjoy it when he still can. And then he addresses his subjects to confess how much he loves war as well as the Holocaust or the Blitzkrieg. When his warriors hear him speak with such passion about the war and the different scenarios in which it is fought, they become very happy. But at the end of his speech he asks them to provoke a war as if it were hell itself. And that is why he asks everyone who follows him if they also want the war to be a bloodbath. Upon hearing this, his soldiers begin to cheer him, shouting Krieg, to which he promises to give them what they ask for, since he plans to destroy those who forgot them and thus wake up those who fell into a deep sleep, so that in this way they remind everyone of the taste of true fear. And he also wants to remind you that there are things between heaven and earth that you didn't believe existed even in your worst nightmares. Finally, Elmair is informed that the lights of Europe can already be seen, and that makes him very happy because he fulfilled what he promised. Later, when looking at Europe, Elmair thinks that Alucard should listen to his victory song. And later we see how all the alarms where General Penwood is are ringing. His people inform him that communications with Information Regulation Headquarters have been interrupted. Hearing this, Penwood becomes worried and even more worried when he discovers that they have also lost contact with the BTN in London. But that was not all, since communications from the Air Force Base were also cut off. The general cannot understand what is happening when he hears that they are losing communication with important agencies. So he then worries, thinking that the war has already started, and Integra, upon hearing it, confirms his thought. The scene changes and we see how the Nazis are eager to quickly reach the city. For their part, the citizens of Europe watch in fear as the moon turns black. Meanwhile, Elmair tells his battalion that the night has arrived that will fulfill all their wishes. When they hear that the night of war has arrived, they get excited and applaud Elmair. But the teacher stops them and asks them to now pay attention to their guides on page 3 called London Explodes. Schrödinger, for his part, when trying to read the guide, realizes that he lost it, so he must see the captains. And then Elmair tells First Lieutenant Zorin that his objective is Hellsing as well as the defeat of Alucard. For that reason he will give him the Zeppelin II cruiser and some troops, although he asks him not to give the final blow until the arrival of the main troops. But Zorin assures him that he shouldn't worry because Hellsing without Alucard is something simple to take. However, he tells her that she doesn't have to underestimate either Integra or Siras, since Integra is the leader of the Hellsing family, who are the most powerful vampire hunters in history. And on the other hand, the police girl Siras, her mere existence is miraculous, except that perhaps she didn't even realize it. But even though they are both terrifyingly inexperienced and incomplete, he confesses that he values them at the same level as Alucard. Finally, Elmair tells everyone that the time has come to fulfill the first objective, which is to destroy all of London. But the professor asks him if they will also attack the cabinet war rooms, to which he responds that of course they will. And because he gave permission to burn anything that bothers them, different people suggest buildings to destroy. So Elmair repeats to them that they can destroy everything since the imperial capital will be their dinner tonight. And then he proposes a toast to commemorate that the party has begun. In the next scene, we see how missiles descend from the ships onto the city, destroying everything in their path. And after completing the bombardment, Elmair tells the armed troops to prepare for their descent. Therefore, many ground soldiers then carry out the main work, forming different attack focuses. The Nazis observe the chaos caused and are excited to see the hell they are unleashing since they are monsters. During the attacks we see that the Penwood War Headquarters is invaded to try to finish off Integra. and the leader of the invaders takes the opportunity to inform the rest that from now on this place is under the control of Millennium. Penwood, not understanding what is happening, asks the lieutenant who betrayed him what is happening, and he replies that being a vampire is great and tells him that capturing Mrs. Hellsing will surely make his commander happy. But Integra laughs at him because he is just a baby vampire, and she is a specialist in destroying vampires. When he hears her, he gets angry, so Integra tells him that he will receive a German decoration in the other world. And suddenly the lieutenant's hand is cut off by Walter, who is warned that it is time to work. Walter enters the place and demonstrates the great power he possesses by killing a large number of soldiers easily. And after finishing off the invaders, Integra confesses to Penwood that she thought he was the traitor. Penwood responds that he is only incompetent, not a coward, and then informs them that they are in trouble, since the capital is under attack, invaded by a fleet of airships advancing north from the south. Integra, upon hearing this, tells Penwood that they may attack this place, and that is why she asks him to evacuate quickly. But since he doesn't react, the leader Hellsing insists, because she hears how special forces descend from the airships. However, Penwood recommends that he return to his base because he has a job that only they can do. And furthermore, he cannot escape or hide since if communications are fixed he must be able to provide orders. Penwood confesses that he is waiting for some base to resist and then wait for his orders. And because he's in charge of the place he can't leave while it's still operational. Finally, he confesses to everyone that he does not know why he occupies this position since he only inherited it. And he regrets never having tried to achieve something for himself, so he begs Integra to at least let him do his job. Upon hearing this, Integra accepts his decision and before leaving, she gives him weapons with expanding bullets of blessed silver so that he can defend himself. Therefore, the general then asks his subjects that only those strictly necessary stay. But they must not forget that the only one who will remain 100% safe will be him, and then he orders them to leave. However, his companions laugh at him because they all accepted their fate by staying to help him accomplish his tasks. They confess to him that he could not handle everything alone, and for that reason they ask him to sit down so they can do their jobs. And then everyone returns to their respective positions to try to obtain information. Meanwhile in the city, the group of Nazi soldiers kills everyone they encounter, turning them into ghouls. And because of that we see how the London soldiers find it difficult to defend their positions against the Great Army. On the other hand, a ruthless Nazi officer kills a group of police officers who were also trying to repel the invasion. But to his surprise, Integra was passing by the place and easily ended her life. Upon seeing the massacre of the place, she congratulates the police officers for having served correctly, and then demands revenge from Walter. But without expecting it, other Nazi officers were spying on her, so they informed their leader that Integra was returning to her headquarters. On the way to headquarters, Integra listens to General Penwood's communication on the radio. He warns whoever can hear him that his position will fall soon, and as a last order he asks everyone to fight until their mission is completed. Finally, after hearing how the monsters are approaching, Penwood sees Integra's weapon, whom she has known since she was just a girl. He remembers that the first time he saw her he questioned her authority until she scolded him. But he also feels proud to know that she, like her father, trusted him if they needed a favor. So without a second's hesitation he fills himself with courage to blow up the entire barracks installation with him and his enemies. Hearing the explosion, Integra asks Walter to hurry to get to the Hellsing barracks. But before arriving, Walter detects danger and therefore asks the leader to take the car and look for another route. Even though she didn't want to do it when she saw the sacrifice of her butler, she agreed to go, but not before ordering him to come back alive. And later we see that Walter slowly advances to confront the captain, whom he immediately recognized. But before fighting, Elmayer greets him, reproaching him for always interrupting his plans. And then Elmayer orders his people to follow Integra, who changed course at high speed. For her part, Integra tries to flee only to be caught by a group of soldiers who shoot her with everything they have. However, when after a chase the soldiers thought they had caught her, she responded by returning their attacks because she does not intend to give up. And he also takes the opportunity to treat them as cowards by fleeing from their humanity in addition to scolding them for despising humans. Integra then challenges them to face her, only that before they attack they are caught by Anderson. He arrives at the location and reveals to the Hellsing leader that he is accompanied by his companions Heinkel and Yumi, to whom she tells that pagans like her are their enemies because they are very inferior. But Heinkel reminds him that Father Enrico gave them a strict order. Yumi, for her part, scolds him for helping the Hellsing when the order prohibited doing so. But he tells them that he wanted the thrill of war, so he will not allow anyone else to defeat the pagans. And then Alexander faces the undead with his companions from the Judas Iscariot Legion. Alexander motivates his soldiers and subsequently orders them to attack the undead, for they are death and the hordes of death who bow humbly asking the Lord's forgiveness. That is why by surrendering in reverence to God you will conquer your enemies. Finally, while they recite their creed, the Legion of Judas Iscariot kills all the Nazis who were stalking Integra. The scene changes and we move to Alexander, where we see that he served as Enrico's teacher. Enrico, for his part, confessed to Father Alexander that he does not need friends, company, much less his parents, since he will become someone great to be able to look at all of them from the top. And then back to the present, we see how some men wake up Enrico. They inform him that Anderson and his team left early, although they already returned with Integra Hellsing in their custody. Enrico complains because he strictly ordered them to stay away so as not to participate in any hostile acts. And later he watches fascinated as the capital is burning, which he is told is completely destroyed. So Enrico believes that this is due to divine punishment because the inhabitants of London embrace the heretics. And then he checks with his servants what news there is about the USA, so he discovers that the White House is also on fire. One of his servants, after giving him the news, tells him that apparently the president along with his entire cabinet have died, since they were attacked by an assistant who they never discovered was a vampire. So he then confesses that the Vatican now has an advantageous position over that nation. But Enrico, watching the city burn, reveals that if there is greater damage they will take action, otherwise they will maintain their position. And suddenly another minion questions why they don't use them to be useful. He tells her that if they don't interrupt them he doesn't care, because then they can take advantage of the fact that Alucard is not here either, since thanks to that they only target England and Hellsing. But he confesses that even though the Vatican is out of his reach, he is a little worried about Almaer. However, he believes that he will not be stupid enough to attack the Vatican. And then he tells his subjects that he plans to drag himself on both sides to ultimately destroy Almaer with all his power. The scene changes and we see the great army behind Enrico's back who have sworn to liberate both England and all of Europe. And then we can watch as the 340 members of the Brethren Judgment Knights tell Enrico that they are ready. On the other hand, the Knights of the Order of the New Calatrava and those of the Military Order of San Stefano of Tuscany do the same. Finally, the Knights of the Order of Malta also do the same, placing themselves under the orders of Enrico. They tell him that due to the Pope's holy orders they are going to join his cause. And they also reveal to him that from now on he will have the rank of Archbishop, with which he has total control to guide them in battles. After receiving his insignia, Enrico swears loyalty and tells them that their objective is Great Britain, which is why they must begin the conquest. So everyone begins to march while he rejoices in all his ranks with which he has new responsibilities. But suddenly they interrupt him to show him that Alucard is returning to London, which worries everyone. And Enrico, in response to their concerns, promises that all their enemies will disappear permanently, thus starting the war. In the next scene we see how Alucard tries to return to England on Rip Van Winkle's ship. During the trip, as he gets closer and closer, he feels the aroma of the essence of death, which brings back good memories. On the other hand, Almaer orders Zoran to start the engines to quickly reach the Hellsing barracks. Meanwhile, Integra, after being saved by Anderson, tells him that she is leaving his side because she has to go to her barracks. But Heinkel stops her because his orders were to keep her with them. Upon hearing this, Integra begins to humiliate him, demanding that he light her cigarette, which disconcerts everyone. For her part, Yumi, looking at his attitude, wants to end her life immediately, only for Heinkel to stop her first. And because they discuss what to do, Integra asks Anderson what his plan is. He scolds his group and then accepts Integra's invitation, who asks him to accompany her to her barracks. So everyone follows Integra's orders, which Anderson's subjects don't like. And this causes them to ask him if he made the right decision, to which he assures them that he did. Anderson confesses to them that he thinks that because Maxwell's methods raise many suspicions. On the other hand, Zoran worries seeing how the missiles he would launch at the Hellsing barracks are being destroyed. She doesn't understand what's happening because the anti-missile shots come from the barracks. And later he orders that they focus the lamps towards the barracks even though it makes them an easy target. Zoran explains to her soldiers that going in the dark makes no sense because she sees them as if it were day. And when they focus the lamps they see how Ceres is waiting for them there equipped with a great weapon. Meanwhile she talks to Captain Bernadotte about the destruction of London. He confesses that he never liked London because it was a city in which he did not fit. However, going to a bar with his companions and then exploring the city made him discover that it is full of good people. So since they have nothing to do with this war, He wants to take revenge for their deaths by killing all his enemies. Upon hearing this, Sirez responds that she agrees with him and therefore prepares her weapon to attack with all her power. And in doing so he begins to cause extensive damage to the approaching Nazi ship. For this reason, the soldiers tell their Lieutenant Zoran that they must abandon the ship. But she tells them that it is too late and then orders them to make a crash landing on the Hellsing agency. Sirez, who sees the ship approaching, refuses to leave the roof even though Bernadotte asks him to leave, since he plans to use his incendiary grenade launcher to attack without any mercy. Their attack causes the Nazis to lose control, and they end up landing somewhere else, thus avoiding the destruction of the barracks. And thanks to that, everyone begins to celebrate until both Sirez and Bernadotte say that the work is not finished yet. In the next scene, the soldiers were amazed to see the number of monsters that are still alive. For his part, Captain Bernadotte tells Sirez that he will now see how the geese fight. Zoran, on the other hand, is informed that 42 soldiers survived and are attentive to the order to attack. So he tells them that their numbers are enough to slaughter the fools of Hellsing. And then the attack begins, so Bernadotte talks to his men about the special abilities of vampires. However, we immediately discovered that the ground around the agency was covered in traps. That's why many enemies are destroyed by planted mines, which makes Bernadotte proud. Sirez, the one who watches everything from the window, confesses to his partner that he is surprised by what he planned. And later the captain orders the entire third floor to throw grenades at the vampires, while he asks the other soldiers to shoot from all angles so that they cannot even look over their heads. And then a soldier interrupts him to report that the Nazis stopped their advance by hiding on a hill. So Bernadotte tells him that the further away they are from them the better, since otherwise they will just die. And after finishing the explosions, Zoran begins a spell with which he can transform his body into a giant version of himself. This situation left everyone speechless, and that is why Bernadotte, very desperate, asks for a report on the situation. But since his soldiers do not respond, he decides to go see for himself what is happening. And as he approached the sail, he saw how a giant arrived in front of the mansion. Zoran, on the other hand, uses his scythe to destroy the building, causing many deaths in the process. Captain Bernadotte does not believe everything that is happening, and Sirez, seeing all the suffering, goes into shock due to terror. But suddenly he realizes that perhaps they are only seeing an illusion, and that is why he remembers his teacher's words. And thanks to using the eye on his forehead, he wakes up from the illusion, so he tries to wake up the rest. But since he is unsuccessful, he picks up his gun and, using his vampire skills, shoots Zoran, whom he manages to wound in the face. So everyone is subsequently freed from the illusion, only for Zoran to tell him that it is too late. And then we see how a ghoul invades the Hellsing barracks, thus destroying the mercenaries there. So Sirez intervened to stop him, and suddenly Bernadotte heard how they already broke his defenses. The scene changes and we see that the mercenaries are trying to prevent them from entering through the main door, but they are unable to do so. Knowing this, Bernadotte orders his men to regroup, accompanied by all possible weapons. And then he tells Sirez that they are going to place a barricade in this position. For that reason, she must be the offensive of the group who ends up with all the bastards that invade them. The captain also confesses that she will be his ace up his sleeve and his last card before they become vampire food. Before leaving, Sirez asks everyone to stay alive, to which Bernadotte tells her that she must do so too. And after her departure, Bernadotte tells his soldiers that letting a good girl like her die deserves hell as punishment. Upon hearing this, they agree, and that is why the captain tells him that if everything falls apart, they must sacrifice their lives. And later he reminds them that they chose the life of mercenaries to earn money. So when he hears that his men are motivated, he tells them that it is time to die like mangy dogs. Finally, the mercenaries leave, very willing to confront their enemy. On the other hand, Elmayer observes all the chaos fascinated and confesses to his subordinates that he still wants more battle. In the next scene, Zoran laughs, promising not to let anyone escape while his people kill mercenaries easily. And later we see how Bernadotte as a child cries in front of his grandfather because everyone says that his family makes money from wars. So his father is a murderer, and he confesses that everything is true since his family has been mercenaries for more than 8 generations. And he also tells her that his father died in Colombia while trying to earn money for his birth. The very surprised little boy asks his grandfather if he has also killed. And his grandfather answers yes, also in large quantities, since he did it like a good mercenary only for money. But he also confesses that those who fight for different reasons do not know the reason for doing so. However, they do know that they are important, although he believes that they could do all that without having to kill anyone. And then very calmly he wonders if there really are reasons to pull the trigger. The grandfather reveals to him that what is really needed is a change. Only since their lives are not worth that much, it is not worth doing it. And before the attentive gaze of his grandson, he tells him that the most important thing on the battlefield is the reward even above his life. So unfortunately, what they say at their school is true because they are the worst scum on earth. Hearing this, Bernadotte continues to cry and his grandfather asks him not to worry because one day he will understand. And now back to the present, the captain remembers his words, realizing that he was right. For that reason, he then asks his men to bring all the useful things to set up a barricade. The scene changes and we see a large number of dead mercenaries at the main entrance. The mercenaries still alive prepare to escape when they discover that their bullets are of no use. But they also know that they cannot abandon their positions, so they end up murdered at the hands of their enemies. And later we see that Zoran enters the barracks while Sector B informs Bernadotte that they are trapped. However, the captain demands that they come to his area no matter what happens because they must cover the conference room. And then he tells him that if he doesn't reach him, he will die. For that reason, he asks him what he is waiting for to move. But the soldier answers that it is impossible because both he and the rest are wounded and even others have already died. So he asks him to hold on as long as he can at the barricade and says goodbye, asking him to stay safe. When Bernadotte hears this, he gets very angry, although in the end he understands that this is his wish and confesses that it was a pleasure meeting him. And after finishing the communication, the captain asks the rest to finish the barricades. But another soldier asks him what will happen to the boys from Sector B, to which he answers that they are already lost. And suddenly another recruit becomes desperate, shouting that if they stay here they will die too. He, very scared, tells them that Integra, like Alucard, has abandoned them. But Bernadotte asks him why he believes that and then confesses that he won't let him go, since this gigantic house will be his tombstone, and then he calls him a coward for crying. But then he took it from his clothes and confesses that his duty is to make sure that everyone dies like real soldiers. And that's why whether you like it or not, you have to keep fighting or you'll die doing it. The young recruit begins to curse the situation and the captain tells him that he should not think about how they are going to die, since they are only the defense and surely their offense will be the one who turns the fight around. On the other hand, the ghouls continue their massacre while Zoran advances at a firm pace, promising that he will burn everyone. And then he reaches Sector B where he finds the soldier who last spoke with Bernadotte. Zoran locks him in an illusion and this disconcerts the man, who realizes that he is in his house where he sees his daughter. But suddenly he remembers that she is dead and for that reason he tries to escape from the illusion. However, he takes the opportunity to hug the little girl until everything changes and Zoran ends his life. On the other hand, a group of Nazi soldiers enjoy eating the bodies of mercenaries. But by surprise, Siraz arrives at the scene and kills them all, even though they even called for reinforcements. She then looks at everyone she killed and promises that she will annihilate each of her enemies. The scene changes and we see that the enemies have reached Bernadotte's barricade. And even though some of the soldiers decided to surrender, Bernadotte continues giving orders to defend the position. But suddenly the lieutenant informs him that there is no longer enough ammunition. Hearing this, he still decides not to give up. For that reason, the lieutenant confesses that this reminds him of when they were in Uganda. But Bernadotte answers that it is not like that because this time the reinforcements will come. And after saying that a missile went through the barricade which caused serious injuries to Bernadotte, but he pretends he isn't and starts asking for reports on the damage they received. And because no one responds, he decides to look around where he finds his lieutenant dying with his destroyed body. On the other hand, Zoran orders his subjects to launch another missile even though they warn him that they only have one left. But before the minion can throw him, Siraz arrives behind him, ending his life. And later we see how a large number of Nazis are defeated by her. Zoran, upon seeing her, easily recognizes her for being the one who destroyed his ship, which makes her angry. But Siraz, for her part, releases her cannons and tells her that she is the only one left. And her enemy, upon hearing her, responds that she has no problem with that while launching a new illusion. Being aware of this, Siraz tries to free herself, only that no matter how hard she wants, she cannot get out. And that's why we can see how Zoran wants to play with her mind by reviewing her memories as a child. The young vampire suffers hearing how they always wanted to keep her on the sidelines of what she wanted to be. And even Zoran manages to remind him of the day his father and mother died as revenge from a group of criminals. Siraz, upon witnessing this, came out of her hiding place and attacked one of the assassins. However, this caused the other criminal to shoot him in his abdomen. And while he was dying, he could see how the murderer he wounded abused his mother's dead body. So he panics and suddenly Zoran, taking advantage of his condition, cuts off his arm. And later he hurts her again, which is why Siraz, without dying, still tries to flee. But this causes Zoran to start humiliating her, and then cutting off her face for being a scumbag. Finally, after making her suffer, she prepares to end Siraz's life. But before she can do it, Bernadotte arrives and hits her to get the opportunity to shoot her body. And after pushing Zoran away, the captain's squad launches smoke bombs to create a curtain which they must take advantage of to flee. For that reason, Bernadotte, using all his strength, carries Siras on his shoulders. But suddenly a Nazi soldier shoots him in the back, and even though he is bleeding, he continues on his way. Seeing this, Siras asks her to flee because it is too late for her. And when he hears her, he reminds her that he asked her to shut up. But when he was close to his objective, Bernadotte was seriously wounded by Zoran. She tells him that all the effort was in vain, and Siras, for her part, when she sees the injured captain, becomes very worried. Bernadotte laughs at the situation and confesses that it is pathetic that he had to save her when she was the one who came to save them. So when Siras hears it, she tries to get closer to him, and after doing so, Bernadotte gives her a big kiss. And thanks to that, he becomes very happy because he finally stole a kiss from Siras. Finally, before dying, he asks the young woman to feed on his blood so that he can defeat Zoran. But Siras picks him up and gives him a big hug before starting to cry uncontrollably over his death. Zoran, for his part, yells at them that Bernadotte deserved it for being an arrogant worm. And then he shows them that he has reinforcements with which he plans to destroy his entire battalion. So he then induces them all again into an illusion. But when Siras hears that she called Bernadotte an insect, she gets very angry, and that's why she decides to feed on the captain. And thanks to this, she manages to release her true power, which scares Zoran when he sees it. Siras subsequently destroys her enemy's illusion and prepares to begin the massacre. For her part, Zoran, very worried, sees that her soldiers are very afraid even though they are war veterans. And then Siras starts her attack, so the Nazi soldiers shoot her to stop her. However, none of that works as the young woman defeated them all easily. Zoran, seeing that he is approaching her, thinks that all this is too bad. And suddenly Siras holds her by her head, so she tries to beat her away. But he only gets the vampire to bite his hand off. So with his remaining hand, he tries to plunge her into a very deep illusion. And in doing so, he discovers that he has a very disordered spirit because it is mixed with Bernadotte's. Siras, taking advantage of her confusion, hits her against the walls as revenge, causing her great harm. Finally, the young woman ends the life of Zoran, whom the professor disintegrates because she was defeated. At the end of the battle, Siras approaches Bernadotte and then informs her subjects that she is going to retreat. She tells them that she promised the captain that she would defeat her enemy, and that is why she needs to retreat to do so. The soldiers, upon hearing her, understand her, and before she leaves, they show their respects to her as she becomes their new captain. Siras smiles and then quickly leaves using her flying ability. The scene changes and we move to where some men who are dying see a giant angel, which leaves them amazed. And suddenly several angels appear over the city, filling the citizens with hope. But suddenly Enrico's voice is heard, who tells them that he is a representative of the Angel of Death. So now the Inquisition will carry out its verdict on the accused Briton and the monsters. Enrico then tells them that they have all been sentenced to death, which terrifies those who hear it. On the other hand, Elmayer talks with Schrödinger until they are interrupted by the professor. Upon seeing him, Elmayer asks him if they can use his ace up their sleeve, to which he responds yes, because after an accelerated surgery he is ready. And later we see how Elmayer goes to the 1st Battalion to put on their anti-ultraviolet equipment. The soldiers follow his orders and begin to regroup, while on the other hand Enrico's army takes position. But suddenly Enrico orders that they begin the death sentence, and this causes missiles to be launched at the Nazis. The professor, witnessing this, asks Elmayer to return inside the ship, but he ignores it because he is so enjoying all the hell around him. And then when he plays the music of the battlefield to direct the combat, he surprises the professor. However, suddenly an enemy helicopter finds them, but when they try to attack it, they are destroyed by Walter. And Elmayer, after thanking him, begins to laugh, telling them that all this was decided a long time ago. In the next scene, the people lament that the angels didn't really come to save them. And Enrico, for his part, enjoys the destruction of the Protestants, rejoicing in the power of the Vatican. On the other hand, Integra, who manages to see him, is furious when she discovers that he betrayed them. Anderson reminds him that in times of war, betrayal is only a matter of time. But when Integra thought she was in trouble, he confesses that he doesn't like all this at all. Since Enrico is drunk and overwhelmed by the influence of power, he complains that they were just simple instruments of violence. He tells Integra that he only considers himself a force to be used in the service of the Lord. and then he laments that Maxwell is no longer being used as God's power because he is actually abusing his power. Hearing this, Heinkel interrupts him to communicate the Archbishop's orders, which are to learn and contain Integra. But while his companions point at Integra, Father Anderson responds that he does not like that order. His words surprised Heinkel, and upon hearing him insist, he repeats again that he doesn't like them. And suddenly Sira arrives at the scene to save her leader, who asks her about the status of the headquarters. Sira tells him that they were attacked by a large company that destroyed everything, although now they have defeated the enemy. However, he tells her that in exchange for that Bernadotte has died, to which Integra asks him if he absorbed her blood. She answers yes, and that is why those from the Iscariot organization point their weapons at Sira's. But Anderson stops them because she is not a rival they can handle. And then he confesses to Sira's that his gaze seems to come from the cauldrons of hell. So he asks him what he has become, and suddenly they both notice Alucard's presence. The scene changes and we see how a thick fog arrives from the river which protects a ghost ship. But from the boat Alucard smiles and then begins his attack. Alucard positions himself among Enrico's forces, causing Anderson and Captain Nazi to also appear there. They approach Alucard, very upset, and on the other hand, Elmayer, who observes everything, analyzes the forces that are going to fight in the war. Alucard, for his part, begs Integra to give him orders, to which Integra asks him to dye his enemy's blood color. So he basically have to search and destroy without leaving anyone on this island alive. Upon hearing her, Alucard accepts her orders, and therefore the leader releases all of Alucard's power to attack. And then we see how Alucard begins a summons, which worries everyone. For that reason, Anderson, like the captain, attacks Alucard with all their power and people. A very worried Anderson knows, like everyone else, that if they do not defeat this monster, the results will be disastrous, and while everyone is shooting at him, Alucard continues to release his power while waiting for the souls he is awakening. Finally, after stopping the shots, Alucard summons his creatures and attacks the armies directly, and then he proceeds to invade the battlefield with his own undead army. When Enrico realizes this, he is very scared and cannot believe how it is possible. On the other hand, Integra tells Sirius that all those souls make up the vampire Alucard. And then he explains to his subject that blood is how souls are bought, because it is the intermediary between buying or selling a life. For this reason, he reveals that sucking blood is taking someone's life for yourself. Meanwhile, Anderson sees some acquaintances among Alucard's army and says he understands why Alucard never dies. The scene changes and we see that Enrico is very worried about the arrival of the Royal Wallatian army. He questions Alucard what kind of monster he is because he consumed his own army, servants and citizens. Finally consumed by terror, Enrico begins to scream that Alucard is actually Dracula himself. Alucard, for his part, after releasing his power, orders the army to attack his enemies. Enrico's forces, upon seeing his army approaching, decide to position themselves in defensive mode. On the other hand, Elmayer and his people believe that Alucard's army is magnificent. In the next scene, Hellsing's enemy armies begin their attack against Alucard. However, they are quickly devoured easily by Alucard's army, who even manage to defeat the helicopters, since Alucard has Rip Van Winkle and Alhambra Tubal-Cain among its ranks. Enrico, who is in his own transport, is shocked by everything that happens, and suddenly he hears his men begging him to order a retreat because this is no longer a battle. Blinded by power, he refuses to comply with her request because he is an archbishop. But suddenly his transport is shot down and he falls into the line of fire of Alucard's army. Enrico is first scared until he realizes that there is reinforced glass protecting him, and so he mocks them, only to be surprised by one of Anderson's knives passing through the glass. Anderson reminds him that they are the Iscariot who mete out divine punishment on earth. That's why now they're going to shatter your silly dreams without making any exceptions. And after saying goodbye to his friend, he witnesses Enrico's pleas from afar to save him. Anderson later walks through the destruction to find Enrico's body, since he does not want to allow him to die alone, and when he arrives he calls him a fool for having become drunk with power. And after accompanying his friend, he orders the Vatican forces to withdraw. Anderson informs them that this will not be the place of his death and demands that they quickly go protect the Vatican, since they also have to protect Catholicism, and then he promises them that he will defeat Alucard. But Yumi and Heinkel ask him not to try because he won't have a chance. He tells them that he will do it now, taking advantage of the fact that all Alucard's restrictions have been released. So he is aware that at this moment Alucard is a simple vampire, and he tells them that perhaps this was the Nazi commander's strategy from the beginning. But after regretting all the sacrifices that were made to kill a single individual, he said goodbye to his men. The scene changes and we see how Integra welcomes Count Dracula. Ceres tries to talk to him only to be intimidated by just looking at him and still consults him about his beard. But Alucard does not say a single word as he approaches her and caresses her as if he were her father. And suddenly Anderson interrupts them, ready to attack Alucard, who manages to stop him. But then a tough fight begins in which both leave everything to end the other's life. During their fight, Alucard rejoices to see that his enemy is trying to stick a bayonet into his heart like 500 years ago. Upon hearing this, Anderson promises that this time he will kill him and then goes on the attack. But Alucard defends himself using his pistols made by Walter, and thanks to them he manages to wound his enemy. And then Alucard asks him what he plans to do when he has a monster in front of him since he has little chance of success. But Anderson responds that even though his chances are almost zero, it is enough to finish him off. Elmayer, for his part, observes what is happening from his ship and rejoices that everything will be destroyed, including Alucard. Meanwhile, the fight between Alucard and Anderson continues although the father's entire body is destroyed, since Anderson uses his willpower to stand up and challenge Alucard again. Alucard admires his human attitude and upon seeing him attack, he sends his subjects against him. However, the father still makes his way to the vampire who is waiting anxiously for him. Alucard wants him to pierce his heart just like Abraham Van Helsing did. But before achieving it, Anderson is detained by Alucard's army, and when he thought it was his end, the subjects he sent home led by Heinkel arrived to help him. He complains about his decision only to hear his reasons for coming and accept that they are all marching towards hell. On the other hand, the mayor is happy to see his plan going successfully and is glad that now they all became the same. The scene changes and on the battlefield we see how the members of Iscariot begin to sacrifice themselves. And thanks to them, Anderson finally manages to stand in front of Alucard, who congratulates him for achieving it. Anderson, for his part, shows him that he has a weapon of mass destruction which surprises Alucard. And the father then shows him the remnant of a miracle which Alucard recognizes as Alina's needle. But before his rival attacks him, Alucard asks him if he wants to become a monster of God. And then he tells him that it will be an immortal game of the divine which will end in this same way. Alucard tells him that they are going to be the monster that recognizes God and the monster that denies God. So he warns him that if he becomes a monster it would be like admitting that he was too weak to continue as a human. And as much as he wants to prevent him from becoming a monster, Father Anderson does not think the same. For that reason, she uses Alina's needle regardless of the consequences that come with doing so. And because of that, Alucard gets angry and tries to kill him for choosing to be a monster. But before firing his weapon, the father cuts off his head, demonstrating his new power. Yumi and Heinkel can't understand what Anderson has become, so they are scared. And suddenly they see how the monsters attack each other trying to take their lives. During the fight we see how Anderson managed to put his sword through Alucard's face, and later he used his sacred thorns to trap him, thus taking away his powers. In the next scene we see the Nazi ships lose altitude, which has them very worried, since they have also lost communications with different squadrons that were on the ground. But when they needed orders from Elmayer, their leader asks them to stop making noise because they are bothering him. And then he suggests that they carefully analyze what is happening because losing a few ships or soldiers is not serious. Elmayer then asks his captain on board to distribute the remaining ammunition to the foot soldiers. He replies that he doesn't have enough ammunition, to which his boss recommends giving them anything they can hit with. And he also asks him that after taking charge of arming everyone he must also organize a final offensive. But while Elmayer was having fun singing songs, his captain was not satisfied with the orders he gave him. And for that reason he stops him, complaining that they are not the SS since they are the German naval forces. So he confesses that he came this far following his orders, that's why he won't send men to just die. Upon hearing this, Elmayer is surprised to see that he was able to observe the entire war and still did not realize what the real battle is. And then he starts shooting although he failed all his attempts. For that reason he orders his people to execute him as a traitor. Finally he ordered again that everyone prepare with the weapons that are still available because he has the war under control. On the other hand, we observe that Alucard is dying, and for that reason he sees himself as a child. And because of this we discovered that Alucard as a child was part of a group of servants of God. But one day someone of higher rank decided to abuse him even though he was just a child. However, because I have a lot of faith in God, I still continue to fight battles in his name. So now his vampire version asks him if God has ever descended on them. And later we observed how Alucard, even though he fought those battles in the name of God, never obtained a response from him. And one day, when he crossed paths with Elmayer, He punished him by cutting off his head, except that he drank blood first. In the next scene, Alucard hears the voice of Ceres who is calling him. But suddenly Alexander attacks Alucard again, causing Ceres to intervene to protect him. And in doing so, Alexander uses his new abilities to retain her and Alucard. Ceres, even though she is being caught, does not stop protecting Alucard, begging him to regain his desire to fight. So when he hears her scream, he confesses that he can hear her clearly and then tries to free himself from his enemy. Alucard confesses to the father that if he had killed him right now he would have been happy. Since 523 years ago, if I had taken his heart I would have also been very happy. But that's just a thought from the past because now there's no way I can beat him. Alucard then destroys Alexander's sword and after freeing himself attacks the father under the watchful eye of Integra, who remembers his father's words talking about some immortal monsters that exist in the world, and decides how he wondered if maybe those monsters really were the ones who decided his immortality, since everyone seeks endless wars or bloodbaths, leaving only suffering around them. However, he didn't believe that was what they wanted because he actually thinks that they just want to be understood. And then we see that Alucard manages to break through Alexander's defenses until he reaches his heart. Finally, Alucard manages to defeat him and then begins to lament that Alexander has the same pathetic story as him. But suddenly the father laughs at him and after asking him not to cry, he asks him what the childhood fear is that terrifies him. During dawn, Alexander reminds him that by becoming a demon he would never have to cry again. And then he asks her to let him hear her arrogant laugh before she finishes fading away. But first he asks him how much longer he must remain in this unhappy mortal existence. Alucard replies that he will do so until the sins of his past catch up with him and are consumed by his future. And later Alucard says goodbye, promising that they will see each other in limbo. The scene changes and we see how Integra pays her respects while Alexander says goodbye to the rest, asking them not to mourn him. And after his death we can see how many buildings are destroyed by Walter, which surprises everyone. When the Hellsing leader sees him, she is surprised and asks him if he is still him. Walter, for his part, just punches what's left of Alexander and asks them why they should care about such pitiful scum. And then Ceres asks him what they did to him, to which he replies that they vampirized him after capturing him. But not only that, since they also brainwashed him to make him fight against his former compatriots. And to Ceres' concern, he confesses that perhaps that was what he needed to hear. Walter then confesses that he is here of his own free will to satisfy his own desires. So he feels that now because of his own resentment and hatred he needs to cut his ties before dawn. Upon hearing this, Integra gets very angry and demands explanations as to why he is doing this. But he asks her to never say his name again and Yumi, seeing his attitude, decides that she is going to attack him. However, when she thought she had defeated him, Walter tells her that she is wrong because she is actually dead. Heinkel, seeing the death of his companion, becomes enraged. But before he can do anything he is killed by the captain. In the next scene we move to the arrival of Mr. Islands to a military post due to the Queen's orders, and there he talks to a commander about the state of England as well as what Penwood did. So Islands, very upset with the situation, tells his commander that what his enemies did is unacceptable. And he responds that forgiveness is not an option, that is why they are going to eliminate all the Nazis using a bomb as revenge. But he also informs Islands that after casting it will take him half a day to clear the area of vampires and occult phenomena. And he also tells him that he has already mobilized the forces on foot, only that there is a problem in London, which is that they can only contain it. So he reveals that His Majesty along with some big shots are even talking about implementing the final solution. Hearing this, Islands asks him if this is a nuclear solution, and when he receives an affirmative answer he becomes worried. But the commander assures him that this is only the last option because bombing his own country is an extreme measure. And for that reason His Majesty still has faith as long as there is someone fighting to save London. Hearing this, Mr. Islands realizes that it is because Integra is still fighting. But suddenly his ally asks him if he believes they were betrayed by someone within the Round Table. Islands first defends that Penwood had never betrayed them. So his ally reminds him that they are the only two living members of the Round Table. And for that reason he asks who of the two was the traitor, to which Islands replies that he doesn't think it's them. However, there is one fact that worries him, and that is that after the death of Arthur Hellsing he offered to accompany Integra. And during his stay there he discovered that Arthur's younger brother was a dangerous and disturbed man. So he asked Integra's butler, whose name is Walter, to take good care of the little girl. But he never showed up the night Richard Hellsing tried to kill Integra. And then he reveals details about what happened that night, which begins to worry the commander. But then he confesses that he thinks Walter was the one behind everything that is happening. Meanwhile, in the battle, we see how the captain did not take Heinkel's life because he only destroyed half of his face, since he did not want her to interfere in the battle, and he also had to deliver a package to her. But Heinkel, being alive, becomes enraged because his enemy does not even see him as an enemy because he has little power. And then his companions approach him only for Heinkel to ask them to take care of Yumi. But they inform him that the young woman has died, which makes him sad and angry at the same time. Heinkel decides to bandage his face as best he can and asks his companions for a weapon because he wants revenge on Walter. On the other hand, Walter demands that Alucard stand up so they can fight. However, Alucard begins to laugh and reminds him that he once told him that he wouldn't want to take the easy way out. So she confesses that she doesn't like seeing him turned into a monster because she preferred his aged body. Walter replies that he did it to become the true angel of death, and for this reason he demands him again to stand up to fight, to which Alucard only responds that now they are both nothing more than dogs. For that reason Alucard reminds him that hunting dogs do not bark at each other, and then he asks Integra to give him her orders, promising that if she orders him to be killed, his entire body will do what is necessary. But before she responded, he reminded her that he can do anything, although she is always the one who pulls the trigger. Upon hearing this, Integra lights a cigarette and then orders Alucard to search and destroy as he always did, since he is there to annihilate all obstacles that appear for Hellsing, no matter what or who the problem is. The scene changes and Almayer for his part is very happy that Integra has decided to destroy his butler. For his part, Alucard accepts her orders while Walter is glad that Integra has made that decision. She, very embarrassed and upset, confesses that she doesn't care how it got to this point. But he reminds him that he has only become an enemy of Hellsing and Great Britain, which is why they must discharge him. And suddenly Almayer interrupts them to praise Integra for becoming his true enemy, since she went from having a minuscule power to what she now evolved into being the most powerful enemy in the world. Almayer then orders his ship to land on the battlefield to allow Integra to board his ship. Alucard, seeing this, asks her to also go kill Almayer to end all this. And then she asks Siraz to accompany her mistress so that they can both end this nightmare after 55 years. Before leaving, Siraz, even though Walter has changed now, decides to thank him for everything he did for her. When he hears her, he is surprised, and after smiling, he confesses that it was an honor to help her. And then Integra boards the enemy ship where Schrödinger receives her, so she shoots him in the head. Finally, we see how Walter and Alucard prepare to begin their fight. During the fight, both demonstrate skill and power, managing to wound each other repeatedly. So Alucard had to summon his creatures, the black dog Baskerville, which Walter knows very well. And for that reason he manages to easily hurt him, which causes him to ask Alucard to attack him with everything he has. But when he tries to attack using his gun, Walter manipulates it for him, causing a wound near his face. The butler reminds him that he was the one who made it and that he only made it to fight Anderson. And suddenly they are interrupted by the appearance of Luke Valentine, who emerged from what was left of Baskerville. Luke wakes up and is shocked to see all the destruction around him. But Walter, upon seeing him, uses his abilities to take his soul since he could use him as his tool. However, the butler realizes that his body is beginning to fail, which worries him greatly. And later he launches the attack with Alucard again using Luke. Alucard is surprised to see him alive and scoffs that it wasn't even good enough for his dog to digest. And then he picks up a gun to try to cut the ties that Walter maintains with his puppet. Meanwhile, Walter, on the other hand, is bleeding from the inside, so he tries not to die at that precise moment. And then he stands up, maintaining his posture to prepare for combat again. In the next scene he manipulates his puppet to shoot Alucard, who decides to take all the hits, since he also thought about getting caught so he could get a chance to finish off Luke. Finally, after finishing him off, his rival arrives at the scene to show him that he has him trapped. Walter activates his movements and dismembers Alucard, which causes him to be very weakened. So he tries to rush to Alucard's heart to end his life. And after achieving it when he thought it was all over, Alucard shows him that he is very wrong, since he actually appears behind Walter congratulating him on how he destroyed his puppet. Alucard then hits him, demanding that he not throw in the towel yet when he only hit him. And later he tells him that he is having problems because of the process they used to transform him into a vampire. Walter, for his part, suffers from pain as he slowly turns into a child due to the power of regeneration. And when Alucard sees this, he begins to laugh at him, provoking Walter's fury, who asks him to stop playing. But Alucard, demonstrating his new form, confesses that no matter which one he uses, none of them have meaning for him. So, just as he told him 50 years ago, he doesn't care about the reasons why he changed sides. And then he explains that they are all making the same mistakes that he had already made 500 years ago. Alucard then asks him if everything he did was only because he had promised to fight him. And then he mocks Walter by stating that he's still the same little ruffian he was 60 years ago. So now he challenges him to fight again. The scene changes and we see how Elmayer's ship is exploding in parts, which surprises Walter. Alucard tells him that perhaps it's because his mistress and her servant are having so much fun burning everything to ashes. And then they ask them to start their fight from scratch because they are almost reaching the climax where it is now Hellsing's turn. On the other hand, we move next to Integra, who advances through the ship causing great damage. And because of them, the ghouls try to stop her, only for Ceres to support her leader to finish them off easily. After finishing off their enemies, they discover that they long for death, which is why Ceres complains that if they wanted it, they would have hanged themselves. But suddenly Elmayer interrupts them and through a loudspeaker informs them that they did not do that because they do not want to die just to die. Because due to the exclusion that everyone makes of them, they need a great cause to die for. But while he tells them that, Ceres and Integra discover that the captain has approached to confront them. The captain stares at them, listening attentively as his leader tells the girls his motivations for confronting them. And after Elmayer finished his speech, Ceres asks Integra to come forward because she will face her enemy. Ceres further begs him to find the elder because they cannot allow him to say another word. Her boss, upon hearing her, asks her to promise that she is not going to die because otherwise she will not forgive herself, and assures her that she will take care of the enemy leader. But suddenly they see that the captain tells them where their leader is, which Integra was grateful for. And then we see how Ceres prepares for combat against the Nazi soldiers. During the fight, both use different weapons to try to destroy the rival defense. But because the captain felt inferior, he decided to reveal his true nature by transforming into a werewolf. Meanwhile, outside, Alucard tells Walter that he bet everything on the losing side, since his allies will destroy his own and he will also end his life, which is tragic. Alucard then reveals that since he is a traitor, he will not show mercy to him because he never did it to anyone. In the next scene, we see how Alucard begins to collect the blood of all the fallen warriors because he is hungry. For his part, Elmayer is informed that everything is going as he predicted. When he hears that news, he becomes happy because this will bring him victory. And then he explains to the professor that he never considered Alucard a vampire or a human but rather a castle. So it is something like a river of death with a conglomerate of corpses commanded by the will of a tyrant. And for that reason all this time he has been thinking about how to defeat him because of his ability to change bodies. Elmayer later tells all the abilities he discovered about Alucard and complains that he has nothing because he is only a human. And that is why he confesses to the professor that he would like to be a vampire because it is fascinating to be immortal to fight forever. However, not being able to do so reminds him of when he was killed in combat during the war. But before dying he was able to witness how the spilled blood tried to take his soul. And since his heart, soul, and life belonged to him, he did not allow that blood to force him to merge with someone else. So from that day on, seeing how wonderful Alucard is, he began to envy him, thus motivating his desire for him to be his enemy. And later, when he walks alongside his most faithful allies, he confesses that he has been preparing this war for 50 years. In the next scene, Elmayer is happy because the 50 years of preparation were all just for this moment. Since when Alucard breaks his last restriction and releases all those lives, he will be alone in his castle. But until the time comes, he worries that Alucard will drink a lot of blood again because everything will become horrible. And he believes that this is unfair because it turns both life and death into a fraud. So he asks the professor how to kill a king of misfortune. And in response to his silence, he tells him that for this he planned this moment in which Alucard will drink poisoned blood, just as tyrants do by drinking poisoned wine in their own arrogance. On the other hand, Ceres, who faces the captain, is very worried when she sees his true form. The werewolf attacks the young woman, causing her great damage as well as sending her through different parts of the ship. Ceres, seeing his situation, believes that he is too strong and that is why he begins to give up. However, Bernadotte suddenly reminds her that she is not like that and then asks her not to give up easily. Upon hearing his voice, she is motivated and Bernadotte asks her to kill her enemy together now that she is awake. And later Bernadotte tells Ceres how to attack her rival. But the captain, after evading their attacks, laughs at home, proving that he is a true monster. And because of the combat, Ceres realizes that they are where the Nazis have kept all their gold for 50 years. That's why Bernadotte reminds him how they are thieves and not an army, which makes them less than trash. Upon hearing his words, Ceres becomes enraged at the Nazis and suddenly her rival throws a piece of silver at her. So Bernadotte tells him that maybe he wants them to use it on him because he can't wait any longer to die. And then they both see that their enemy is preparing to attack, so Bernadotte tells Ceres not to dodge him. But after receiving the attack, Bernadotte demands that the young woman attack with everything she has. She takes his advice into account only to discover that the captain can predict her attacks. But she still manages to catch him using her vampire powers, and then Bernadotte kills the enemy. Finally, we see how the werewolf dies with a smile on his face because he longed for it. The scene changes and takes us to Integra, who arrived at the mayor. But although he receives her with kindness, the Hellsing leader begins to shoot. Mayor, upon seeing this, shows him that he cannot kill him with this, and for that reason Integra uses his sword, which does not work either. And then the enemy leader approaches her, confessing that he was worried because she might not make it to the function. He confesses to her that this performance will only last one night, and he wanted to see her with a beautiful lady in the best seats of all. But Integra demands that they end this, to which he ignores her and shows her how Alucard is feeding. Mayor tells him to enjoy the show since this last happened in 1898, and also today Nosferatu Alucard is going to disappear. Surprised, she asks him what he means. In the next scene we see that Schrödinger removes his head to immerse himself in the river of blood that goes towards Alucard. For his part, Alucard, who continues to feed, asks Walter to return to their fight. And with all his pride he responds that the fight is not over yet, so he begs Mayor to stop his plan. And later he attacks Alucard, who receives his blows without even trying to dodge them. So Mayor, who observes everything, thinks that it is too late for Walter because he will not be able to defeat him. And then he informs his subject that he lost the two unusual opportunities he gave him to kill Alucard. For that reason, he begins to list the different sacrifices they made so that he could have his special moment. And then he reminds him that all that was for nothing because his ropes didn't go far, causing Alucard to become very strong. Alucard, for his part, picks up Walter's clothes and asks him not to lose focus, since he shouldn't get discouraged because it will only take him 1,000,000 more attempts to beat him. And then while he questions that he could never beat him anywhere else, Mayor thinks he already won. The scene changes and we can see how over time Alucard faced similar situations, only he never lost. But in the present, Alucard was surprised to see the sunrise, and that awakened his nostalgia as he remembered his old lives. And as he did so, he realized that he always observes the same thing when he is about to die. Alucard reflects that when he always looks at that light he thinks it is so beautiful. And suddenly their form begins a change where their absorbed souls begin to fade. So Integra, upon seeing this, asks her enemy what he did, to which he tells her that Alucard assimilated Schrödinger's nature, who is a Cheshire cat which jumps between worlds of probability whose existence is uncertain. For that reason, as long as you maintain your identity, you will be everywhere and nowhere at the same time. But now that he has merged with the consciousness of 3 million, he can no longer identify himself. And because of this he is neither dead nor alive, causing Alucard to only be a collection of imaginary numbers. However, Integra does not plan to give up and demands that Alucard not close his eyes. But Alucard cannot comply with her orders and then says goodbye to her. Upon hearing this, Integra becomes enraged until Mayor's entire ship begins to implode. Mayor, for his part, tells him that he gave everything to Alucard and in exchange he took what he had and then erased it. And then he rejoices that this is the first victory in his war record. But suddenly Ceres arrives at the place after finishing off her rival, and he tells them that apparently they will be the ones who are going to kill him. Walter, on the other hand, laughs very happily because Alucard is finally gone and suddenly gets angry because he doubts whether this is what he wanted. But to his surprise he is shot by Heinkel, who waited for his moment to take revenge. So Walter is now content with his ending as he will simply die as a traitor. And then he anxiously awaits the final shot while looking into the eyes of young Heinkel, who uses his weapons to wound him several times. Walter accepts that the young man has the right to shoot whatever he needs, only that he will not be able to kill him. And then he uses his ropes to hurt Heinkel, so he takes advantage of the moment by fleeing the place. But while he tries to flee, he approaches the Nazi ship, which he climbs with his ropes. Mayor, for his part, confesses to Ceres that he is happy to meet her because she will kill him, unlike Alucard. Because if he had to face him, he was most likely going to kill the vampire because he was his archenemy. But since that has already happened, now Mayor declares himself their archenemy, and then challenges them to defeat him. Hearing this, Integra orders Ceres to shoot until the threat in front of them is eliminated. However, each of his shots were stopped by the barrier that the professor prepared for Mayor. He complains about her stamina as he becomes fascinated by watching the destruction Ceres causes with her weapons. But after several shots his protection disappeared, and that's why Integra tells him that it's all over. Only when he sees him he discovers the true nature of Mayor, who was a machine. He tells them that he is a human, denying that he is a machine. To which Integra reveals that he is actually a monster. But the Elder answers that it is not like that since he is still human because he still maintains his will. and then he tells him that a monster was Alucard who needed blood to maintain his soul, so he consumed others to survive. He then asks her not to compare him to someone so weak, since as long as he has will, he will be a human regardless of his appearance. Finally, he confesses to them that he hated Alucard because he is a monster in human form and he is a human in monster form. Later he tells them that all wars start because there are two sides, just as they are doing it now. And because they are so different, they have declared war on each other for a long time. Upon hearing this, Integra accepts his proposal to start the war, and that is why she gets ready for combat. And then we see how the mayor shoots the Hellsing leader without being able to harm her. So Integra comes to stand in front of him to end his life. And after both shots, he is happy for landing a shot in Integra's face, only she managed to hit him in the brain. That's why we can see that the mayor has died happy about what war is after seriously wounding the Hellsing leader. Finally, after his death, Integra thinks that this was not a war because he was just waiting to breathe his last. That's why his absolute retribution is death, and she also complains that not a single part of him was human. And while everything starts to burn down, Integra tells him that humans always kill monsters because it is their duty. On the other hand, we see that the teacher refuses that everything is over, so he wonders what he should do. And then he begins to collect his research to spread it around the world. But suddenly Walter asks him where he plans to go, and with the last of his strength he questions the professor's research, who gets angry with him when he hears him think that all this was just a comedy. And for that reason he promises that one day he will surpass Alucard, to which Walter tells him that they are both going to die because they are failures. And then he catches him with his ropes, causing the professor to fall to the ground. But in doing so he revealed Mina Harker's corpse, which allows Walter to realize what he was studying. Since Mina Harker is the only existence that Alucard fed and was fed, thus being the beginning of everything. Because according to rumors it is said that Hellsing defeated Dracula, which made him become human. However, Dracula had not died since he was still inside her, and no matter what happened he would always stay there. And it is because vampire blood cannot be eradicated with any sacred sacrament, holy water, or crucifix. So now Walter tells the professor that even though he exhumed Alucard's corpse and made it even more of a corpse, the only thing he got were defective copies, which is why he thinks this is a comedy. And suddenly a cargo from the plane falls on the professor, causing his death and Walter's happiness, who regrets not having been the one to defeat Alucard. So smoking one last cigarette he says goodbye to Integra, but not knowing that she is able to feel when her soul has left her body, which made her very sad. And then Ceres picks up Integra so that they can both escape from the destroying ship. In the next scene we see a soldier investigating a simultaneous American and English bioterrorist incident, which is also known as the Zeppelin case, in which there were 64,300 American casualties and 3,718,917 English casualties. And later we see that he tells his ally that he must go solve a problem by preventing what happened 30 years ago from happening. The commander tells Ireland that when he makes that face he looks almost like his great-grandfather. The scene changes and we move next to Ceres, who observes Integra's fencing class. But suddenly they are interrupted by Macube from Section 13 of the Vatican, whom Integra scolds for having come. He and his people confess that they came here because they don't like to wait and that they weren't treated well. But Integra asks them to return to where they were to wait for her because she wants to keep them wandering around freely. And after their departure they inform Macube that the place has almost no security, so they could defeat them if they attack. However, Heinkel calls his partner a blind brat and then shows him the place's security system, which surprises the young man, who asks what that was, and his superiors reveal to him that it is the shadow of Ceres Victoria. But still Heinkel suggests to Macube that they take at least half of the round table. And upon hearing it he refuses because they have already lost a lot, just like the Vatican, who lost power after the Ninth Crusade. In the next scene we move to an underground prison where we find Alucard's coffin. And later during the night we watch as the coffin fills with blood. So after a moment Alucard silently approaches Integra to suck her blood. But before she gets it she starts shooting, which attracts Ceres' attention. They are surprised to discover that it is Alucard, who has already returned. Ceres, for her part, is very happy and Integra scolds him for being late. But he tells her that it was because he was killing himself inside. And then he reveals to them that he killed all of them except one. That's why he finally got here. However, that is not the important thing, because it reveals to them that he is now everywhere and nowhere. But since Integra insists that she arrived too late, Alucard apologizes to her, who offers to drink his blood. And after he accepts, the leader Hellsing approaches the vampire so that he can taste his blood.